I find it utterly amazing. Last weekend, we were celebrating the Epiphany of our Lord, a little infant. Today, Jesus is calling his disciples. Children grow up so quickly nowadays. It's amazing. And I imagine most of you have seen the movie Gone with the Wind. If you haven't, you have something to do this weekend when it's so bitterly cold outside. And it's interesting how the director chose the leading lady. Everyone knew that no one but Clark Gable could be Rhett Butler. But who would play Scarlett O'Hara? The director considered a few dozen actresses to perform the role. And finally, he made that surprising decision. Not a girl born in the South, not even an American. She was born in India of British parents. Of course, it'd be Vivien Leigh who would play that role. And almost everyone agreed that she played a superb, unforgettable Scarlett O'Hara. The director took great care in picking who that right person would be for that famous role. The same, but with infinitely much more greater care, God has selected each and every one of you sitting in this pew. He has looked at you. He has looked at you. He's looked at you. And he's picked the part that you're called to play. We see today in the call of the prophet Samuel. When he was a boy sleeping near the ark in the temple, Samuel heard that voice. He went to the priest Eli and he said, "Here I am." But Eli said, "I didn't call you." And so he went back to sleep. And it would go on 2 more times where Samuel would hear this call. And Eli would say, "It's not me." But when you hear that voice calling again, he said, "Say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Of all the children in Israel, God selected Samuel for the role that he would play. And of course, that life for Samuel, it wasn't easy, but he did it. Because God was calling him for that particular reason, for that particular purpose in his life. If you read the 2 books in the Bible named for him, you'll see that he faced enormous struggles. But God chose him, and Samuel never wavered. God continues to call people today. Sometimes it's in unlikely circumstances. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was an Italian boy who heard God's call. He was an unlikely choice because his father was anti-Catholic. He couldn't stand the Catholic Church. He was a member of the Italian Socialist Party, and he constantly would mock the church. His son, Albino, heard one day a Franciscan preacher and felt himself called to become a priest. So Albino's dad was working in another city, and with great trepidation, Albino would write his dad telling him what his decision was. It took a little bit of time for his father to respond, and trembling, Albino opened up that little tiny piece of paper, and there he saw what his father wrote. "If that is what you wish, do it." Eventually, his dad was reconciled with the church, And Albino, he kept that note all of his life, and he still had it in 1978 when, as Bishop of Venice, he entered the papal conclave. And against everyone's expectations, the cardinals elected him, and he became known as the Smiling Pope, Pope John Paul I. God called him. Unlikely circumstances. No one would expect it. His papacy would only last for 33 days. But it made an impression. Today, Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, is beatified and hopefully soon will become a saint. God knew what he wanted. God called him. He heard the voice. He listened to it. Now, God does not only choose famous people like Pope John Paul I or Samuel. He chooses people like you and me. And what happens to be a humbling role might be a hinge in God's plan of redemption. You might be that person. In fact, I should say, you are that person. That God wants to do that role now. Are we listening to his voice? In one of C.S. Lewis's books, The Great Divorce, a working woman with no children and a mean-spirited husband shines as a great saint, important for the salvation of many souls. In God's drama, we don't know who are the leading actors. We'll find out on that final judgment day. What we do know is that God chooses us with care. God chooses with care the role he wants us to play for the drama. Like a great director selecting exactly the right person for a part, God chooses you or me. Are we listening to him? Today, Jesus asks, what are you looking for? Don't be afraid to tell him. And you may hear those beautiful words, come, come, and you will see what God has planned for you, what God has planned for me. God knows our role. Are we listening to his voice to hear it, to know what to do? What are you looking for?